Welcome along to my list of the top 10 units in the classical period. If you've been following my videos, I've actually produced two lists for High Middle Ages, two top 10 lists, but we had a new DLC come out, so I did my second version. But I was always saying that I'm going to come back and I will do a top 10 for the classical period. So this is it. You are here, you've made it, and we are going to go through the top 10 units in my opinion. Now, let's start. Where are we going to go? We are going to start with the Imitation Legionnaires. They look so horrible, so drab and dreary, but in my opinion, they are great value for money. They're only 51, but they're heavy foot and impact foot. There's quite a bit of impact foot in classical, like the Spanish medium foot that's impact, and that's 42, and some of the Samnites as well. They're medium foot. So you know, impact's great, but if it can be heavy foot, then you don't suffer against heavy foot in the open. Whereas with those Spanish troops and the Samnites, they get that -1 modifier for fighting heavy foot in the open, so that they're at a slight disadvantage in that sense. But with the Imitation Legionnaires, 51 is a great price, and you're still getting the heavy foot impact. And there's not that many. I remember saying this in High Middle Ages. The way the game seems to be set up and the way the armies are, it seems to sort of jump. You go from kind of medium foot to fairly average quality heavy foot, and then it jumps to superior. You know, so we've got medium foot at 42, and then you go to pikes at 72, and you know, not all army. This particular army, this is the Pontic 110 army list, so you do have a bit more variation, but quite a lot of armies don't have the Warband at 58 or the Imitation Legionnaires at 51. So they tend to, you know, especially those Greek pike armies, they tend to go from the medium foot with heavy weapon and spear all the way up. They just jump up to pikes. There's not a lot of mid-tier units in the game, in classical period or in High Middle Ages. In fact, there's not that many units that cost in the 50s, and you know, and especially the 51, around 51, I can't think of many units around this price in classical period, so they are a good bargain. At number 9 on my list, I'm going to put the elephants. In now. These units, pretty hit and miss, to be honest with you. They can be fantastic at times. They can rip through the enemy line, and then at other times they just get stuck, and they even fragment almost on first contact or on the melee round. So you just really, you don't know what you're going to get with elephants, but they're a big part of the game. They look wonderful. They add something different. It's not all just spear and cavalry and medium foot. We've got elephants as well, and they're an important part of the classical period. Their impact is fantastic, especially against swordsmen. I was looking at the stats. So, you know, against your standard heavy foot Warband and citizen hoplites, they're 150 up on impact. So that means they've got a great chance of disrupting, and they often do. Even against your better infantry, veteran hoplites, legionnaires, superior warband, veteran spear even, they're 100 up on impact against all those units. Again, good chance of disrupting if they can, and that's the key point with impact, whether it's impact foot or impact from elephants. You've really got to hope that you can disrupt on impact, and it makes all the difference. If you don't, then things often go downhill. Even against pikes, they're 50 up on impact, but 50 up on impact isn't great, because not only is the impact not good, the melee goes to 100 in the favor of the pikes. So you really want to keep away from pikes if possible. Although you do have a chance of disrupting on impact, but it's not a great chance at 50 up. So when you're talking about being 150 up against standard heavy infantry and medium foot, that is pretty awesome. So they do really well against your average infantry, warband, hoplites, and even against legionnaires and superior warband, they're 50 up on them in melee. So, you know, keep them away from pikes, most spear, and everything else they can do really well. They also obviously do well against cavalry, because they disorder cavalry that's close, adjacent. But the problem with fighting cavalry is often cavalry is on the flanks, and then they're just going to be chasing cavalry all over the place, and it can take a while for them to get back to the battlefield, to the center of the action. So really, ideally, you want to be using elephants in the center, really. Number eight, I'm going to go for the superior armored lancers, Stop-Horoi. So I'll just call them the superior armored lancers. They are really the noble armored lancers, and they're pretty good in classical period. Superior quality, got the armor, and also the lancers as well. What is interesting, if you've been following my videos, I just did a top 10 of the worst units in LA, and I put the Noble Armored Lancers, same unit, in at number, I think it was around 8 or 9 on my top 10 worst units. And yet I'm putting these guys in on my top 10 best units. Now, why is that? Well, there's a few reasons, really. I think number one, you just don't get so many lancers in classical period. I mean, this is kind of a typical kind of cavalry list, really. We sort of jump, we go up from armored cav at 40, then we get a few options with veteran. This is the same unit, actually. Veteran armored cav, armored noble cav, same unit, just different name. And then in some lists you get the superior armored lancers. So in LA you get light lancers, the Arab lists have them, there's Roman lancers, Byzantine lancers. You get quite a lot of armored lancers or noble lancers. There's just a lot more lancers that are cheaper than these kind. So that means that in LA these kind of units are not so cost effective, but in classical it's different, because you don't get so much cav. Often armies would only have 6 or 8 cav, whereas in LA cavalry begins to dominate. That's the change, isn't it? Classical, it's all about the pikes and the Romans and the spear, heavily infantry dominated armies. But in LA you start to get over half your army with cav, and also some of the nomadic horse archer type armies, and then it becomes more like 60, 70, 80% cavalry, and then there's a lot more cav on the battlefield, a lot more diverse units, cheaper lancers, and so that's when these kind of units aren't so good. But in LA or in classical, not so many cav on the field, so if you've got some really good units, it can be really helpful. So I think I would, in this kind of list, I would always take some of these units. And the other thing about it is, you know, they're only 4 more than the veteran armored cav and armored noble cav. So that's not much more, and yet you're getting the Lancers, that extra impact for the POA. So they are actually pretty good buy. In stats, looking at the stats, they're about 50 up on impact against most Cav. Noble Cav, they're 50 up. Armoured Noble Cav, 50 up. Celtic Chariots, 50 up. Iranian Armoured Cav, they're 50 up. And then it's roughly around the same in melee. Armoured Cav, 50 up. Noble Cav only 25 up because Noble Cav has got the quality. Roman Lancers, they're 50 up. Iranian Armoured Cav, they're evens because they're superior quality as well. So they've got advantages against almost anything. Even Cataphracts, they're evens on impact, and then they only go to 50 down in melee. So if you get them one-on-one, almost all cavalry units, they're going to have the advantage on impact, and they're probably going to have the advantage in melee as well. So very decent army, good for crushing the enemy cav, and then you can get around the back of the enemy army. It could often turn battles. The cavalry battles can really be important, because when you've only got a few units and you beat what's in front of you, there's just not going to be much to stop you if you can turn them. Often they're pursuing, but if you can get them out of the pursuit, the cavalry can be very, very effective and game-changing in classical. So they go in at number 8. Number 7 on my list, the Javelin Horse. They made my top 10 list in medieval, and they've also made my top 10 list in classical. I think these are units that people overlook. Maybe they don't know how to use that well. I think for new players, especially, getting used to using this kind of unit can be key to improving and getting better in the game. Because at 24, the price of skirmishers, the cheapest skirmishers, they are just great. They can scout, so they can go ahead, especially in maps where there's forest and hills and stuff, and you want to work out where the enemy is and what kind of units he has. These units are great for that. They're fast, they're cheap, so if you lose them, it's not such a big deal, and they can gain intel on the enemy. But they're also fantastic, especially when you take 4 or 5 of them and ganging up on enemy cavalry, and then just throwing their javelins at the cav. And the cav, generally speaking, most cav just doesn't do well against missiles, javelin or bow or arrows. So they're great at disrupting enemy cavalry. They're also great at getting their flank attacks. Okay, they're light cavalry, so it's not a proper flank attack with automatic cohesion drop, but sometimes I always think that from about mid-game on, they really come into their own, because their flank attacks, sometimes they're at plus 25 or 30 on units and cavalry, and that can be enough to get a cohesion drop. So I've seen that happen. Also, they're great at getting around the back of the enemy, and then when you've got your lines engaged and there's infantry that are disrupted or even fragmented, then they can go in and rout units, because it won't take much, especially if a unit's fragmented. You've got a great chance of routing that unit even with these units, and if a unit is disrupted, it's also quite likely that you're going to get them to drop to fragmented with some rear charges from these units. So they are really multi-purpose, multi-dimensional, fantastic units. Unfortunately, some lists you don't really get access to a lot of them. The Carthaginians are quite lucky that you can take about 6, so that's a great number. But even when you can take a couple or 3, I think it's generally worth it. If you haven't got a lot of cavalry, then they can bulk out your line as well and help your cavalry, because it's hard to fight these units with cavalry. If you've got some Noble Cav or Armored Cav, and there's 3 of them, once they charge into these units, it's just wasting time. If Javelin Horse only costs 24 and Noble Cav costs 44, it's a bit of a waste. But then if you don't charge them, you're just going to keep getting javelins in your face. So really, really good at causing problems for the enemy. So they are worthy inclusion on my list, and they are at number 7. At number 6 on my list, what's it going to be? We are going to include the Citizen Hoplites. Wow. I bet many of you wouldn't have believed that they're going to be on my top 10, but I'm going to give you my reasons why. Firstly, price, 42. It's a great price for offensive spearmen. They can handle better infantry. In my tests and from what I've seen on the battlefield, they do pretty well at holding up Warbands, Legionnaires, and some of the stats here. I mean, okay, against Warbands, they're 110 down on impact. Against superior Warbands, they're 160 down on impact. But quite often you can survive. You can survive impact, as we all know. And then if you do that against Warband, they're 50 up. They're 50 up. Against superior Warband, they're evens. They're evens. And Warband costs 58, which is a lot more than 42, 16 points more. And superior Warband is 75. So, to be evens against superior Warband is fantastic for a unit that only costs 42. Okay, the Warband's large unit, so maybe after a certain number of turns they'll get that combat strength modifier, but still, to be evens in POA terms is fantastic. And as they're spearmen, they do well against cavalry as well. So they are a great all-round choice. And in this kind of army, this is one of my favorite armies probably in classical period, like Simichid 320, very balanced army, got good cav, elephant, and they kind of, I think when they work best is when they are like this, what I would call the second line. So you've got your main troops, the pikes, and we've got a lot of them here. Got 8, and 2 of them, by the way, are veteran pikes. So we've got a really decent front line, and these are the supporting cast. We've got the Citizen Hoplites and the Mercenary Hoplites, which are they're the same unit. It's just that these are more maneuverable, and you just have to pay 6 more for that maneuverability, but they're the same. Offensive spear, average protected. So that, I think, is when they can really do well, because in a lot of other armies, once you get past the Legionnaires, once you get past the Pikes, especially with the Greek armies, you tend to often drop down to the medium infantry. There's not a lot of units, as I've said before, that are mid-tier infantry in the 50s or even in the 40s. I mean, it's mainly hoplites, and not every army gets hoplites. So they really can do a really good job, even in classical, as long as they're not the main line. I know some armies, they're hoplite armies, that's a different story. But as supporting troops, they really are fantastic. And as just another example, against the Hastati, now the Roman Hastati costs 61. I think they're about 125 down on impact against Hastati. So if they can hold on impact, they then go up to 13 up on Hastati. Again, only costing 42, Hastati 61, and yet they have the advantage in melee. So fantastic value for money for me. They also, as I've said, do great against cavalry. If cavalry is charging them, then they're spearmen, heavy foot as well, so they can do a decent job on the flanks or as support for your main line. And they justifiably come in at number 6 on my list. At number 5, I'm going to include the Noble Cavalry. I've mentioned in a few of my videos in my army analysis series, and sometimes also in battles I've been in, that the Noble Cavalry is really good. It's just a great price at 44. The armored cav is about 40, or is 40, but these units are just that much better because they're superior quality. So you get plus 50 for quality, and also you've got to remember that even though armored cavalry gets plus 25 for armor doesn't count on impact. So you know you're really up quite a bit against armored cav on impact. You're up 50, and then you're going to be up 25 in melee. So at 44, through superior quality cavalry, they are really good, and they can even, because they're superior quality, they can even hold up better cav. Veteran armored cav, armored noble cav, the same unit, they're just different names. But there's a huge jump here. I mean, this is another point I'd make about noble cavalry. In most lists, there's a big jump. There's not a lot of units. A few lists have some camels, but there's hardly any kind of units in between 60 and 44. So that means if this unit can hold up the veteran armored cav, which it can, that's a great use of your resources because there's such a difference in price, 16 points. So for holding up enemy cavalry, for killing off the armored cavalry, they are a really good. At number 4 on my list, a very late inclusion. I was looking at different units that I can put here into my top 5. Superior Warband almost made it, but I suppose, I mean, it's an absolutely excellent unit, but you don't often get a lot of them. And in this list, we only get 1. They are a little bit expensive at 75. Swordsmen as well against pikes and spears. They suffer a little bit. And they're just not probably quite as good as Roman Legionnaires overall. So I'm going to go for the Machimoy Pike. And I also like highlighting unique units. This has been a constant theme in my videos. I've always said I really like unique units. I think we should have a few more. We don't have to have every army with a unique unit, but you know, related armies, British armies, European armies, Arab armies, whatever it might be, regional perhaps. You know, you've got a lot of those in medieval, the Scottish lists. You've got the Scottish pikes and Highlanders and so on. We've got Spartan pikes, we've got Machimoy pikes. These kind of units I think are just make the game more colourful, and instead of just all the generic pike spear units. So this is quite a unique unit. Not many armies get them. Yes, they are raw quality, but really at the price 48, absolutely fantastic really for the price, because they are still pike units like your standard pike, and they get that deep pike bonus. So I was looking, I did a few tests, and they did really well against, average units they might face. Citizen Hoplites, they're 75 up in impact and in melee. So that's great. Warband, okay, Warband are impact foot. They're 35 down, but they often survive impact, and then they go to 75 up against Warband. 75 up for a unit that costs 48, and Warband costs 58. It's pretty good. Imitation Legionnaires. Imitation Legionnaires, they're down 25 on impact, but then they're up 63, which is great again because the Imitation Legionnaires cost 51. A little bit more expensive. Pikes, even against Pikes. Now, Pikes cost 72. They're only 25 down on impact, 25 down in melee. That is nothing, really. When you consider that they are 24 points less than Pikes, and yet they're only 25 down on the impact phase and the melee phase, that is great value for money. Even superior warbands, okay, they're 85 down on impact, but they've got a fair chance of surviving impact, and then they go to 25 up because of the deep pike bonus. 25 up on superior quality troops like the warband. That is great. Now, I would say I did do some tests actually with these units. The problem is they are raw quality. They do suffer a bit against impact troops. They can double drop. What also happens is if units adjacent to them, if they break, then it's very likely that you're going to get some breaks and disruptions on your troops because of the cohesion checks. Any kind of cohesion check, they suffer. So that is the roll of the dice. But overall, when you factor in their price at 48, in my tests, they were holding. They were beating Citizen Hoplites. They were beating Warbands. They were even beating some superior warband once in melee. So they were really outperforming. Really, they were really doing well. So yes, they do deserve to go in at number 4 on my list. Third on my list, I'm going to put the Roman Legionnaires. The Roman Legionnaires, absolutely wonderful troops. Some of the best infantry in the classical period. They've got superior quality as well as impact, armor, heavy foot. Just a wonderful combination, really. Against most infantry, they're going to just beat them up. Interestingly, I just did a little test. I'm not saying this is definitive, and it was only just a small test. I had about 10 units fighting, and I had the Roman Legionnaires up against Pikes, and it was interesting because the Legionnaires are 50 up on impact against Pikes, and then it goes to minus 25 in the melee round. In the melee round, when you factor in the Pike, which is about plus 100, deep Pike was about 90. Most of the Pikes had about 90. And then you've got the 175 for armor, superior quality, and swordsman. So it was around 15 that the Pikes were up, but that soon went down through casualties, dropped as the Pikes were losing ranks. Also the impact phase, out of 10 impacts, 1 Pike unit disrupted and another one fragmented. So on impact, the Romans can do quite a lot of damage. And even in the melee round, They're passing cohesion checks because they are superior quality, whereas the pikes are only average. Quite a few pikes were disrupting in the second, third, fourth round of melee. And in the end, the Romans won through. Although, if pikes can hold the Romans longer, so from around 5th or 6th round, then pikes can get an advantage, because the Romans are losing out as well in terms of casualties, and the larger size with the extra bonus for larger size units, that does kick in eventually. But overall, the Romans' quality and impact, heavy foot, they are just a great unit. And I would also say probably at 1600 points, the Romans are a bit more dangerous. I remember I took a later Roman army out in late antiquity, and I smashed through quite a lot of armies, because you can take up to 10 of the Legionnaires, and even you can take a couple of the veteran Roman Legionnaires if you want as well, which are even better. I mean, they are really, really expensive, but at 1600 points, you can probably take at least one, and they're elite units, so they are really good. So, yeah, justifiably, the Roman Legionnaires are third on my list. At number two on my list, I'm going to go for the veteran African Spearmen. One of my favourite units in the game. They look great. These wonderful shields. They're veteran spearmen and armoured superior quality. So that is a great combination. They can do well against almost all infantry units you're going to come across in the period, and even the Roman Legionnaires, even though they're 100 down on impact, they're actually 50 up in melee. The impact round is just 1 round. They're superior quality, so they usually survive the impact, and they often don't disrupt. So then the melee round is obviously 5, 6, 7 rounds or whatever it will be, and they're 50 up against Legionnaires. So that is quite good. Similar story against elephants, also 100 down on impact, but then they're 50 up in melee. Cataphracts, they're 50 down on impact, but then they're 50 up in melee. So all of those really good units, Legionnaires, elephants, cataphracts, they're 50 up in melee. So they are a tough cookie. They really are a good unit. Against more average units, Imitation Legionnaires, okay, the Imitation Legionnaires are impact troops, so they're 50 up on impact, but then they go to 112 down in melee against these guys. So all round, brilliant unit. Because they're spear, they're also very good against cavalry. They don't disrupt so much because of their quality. You can bring, at 1600 points, you can bring 6. This is the Carthaginian 216 list. Very good army to use, I think, especially for beginners, because you've got a lot of different units. You've got your Imitation Legionnaires, you've got your medium foot, which is impact foot, elephant you can take, decent cavalry, Noble Cav, which I really like, your skirmishers, and some cheaper, if you want, some cheaper medium foot, the Italian foot. So a real nice combination, and also a nice amount of Javelin Horse as well, which also on my list, my top 10 list. So this is a great army, I think, for beginners to learn how to use all the different kind of parts of an army. With the Romans, it's more about the Legionnaires and the impact, but with an army like the Carthaginians, you've got to use your heavy foot, your Legionnaires, the Imitation Legionnaires, medium foot, cav and elephants all together. The combination with your skirmishers, that's how you get the win, rather than just dominating with one part of your army. So this veteran spear, they are a really important part of all of that, and they justifiably go in at number 2 on my list. At number one on my list, I'm going for the Spartan Pike, a great unit because they've got the deep pike bonus from being a pike unit, plus the quality, they're above average quality. So your normal pike are average quality. So that makes them really strong. If you look at the stats, they're 112 up on impact and in melee against citizen hoplites. Veteran hoplites is 62 up on impact and in melee. Veteran spear, even, they're 62 up on impact, 37 up in melee. Okay, they struggle a little bit more against impact troops, but they still do well against them because most of the time they'll survive impact, and then because of their quality, pass cohesion checks, and then they get the advantage in melee. So against superior warband, they're 48 down on impact, but then they go up to 62 up in melee. Roman Legionnaires, 38 down on impact, and then they're up 37 in melee. So just like tanks, really, they really are excellent units. In my tests against the Roman Legionnaires, they did really well because they were surviving impact, and then they're also large unit, so that combat strength modifier kicks in after 4, 5, 6 turns, and then the Romans really start struggling. Superior warband were doing a little bit better because the superior warband is a larger unit. They're colourful, they're unique. As I've said in my videos, I really like unique units. I think we should see a few more. So I think they justifiably go in at number 1 on my list. Now, if you agree, disagree, put your comments below. This was my top 10 for classical. Wasn't so easy. There's a lot of units I could have put in that I didn't. The superior warband didn't go in. If I do an updated list, they probably will go in next time. Forksmen, the warriors, they're excellent. I think about 48 they cost. They could have gone in. And there are a few other units as well that that I could have put in, maybe mediocre legionnaires, hastati, zealots. There's quite a lot of units that could have made my top 10, but this is my choice. Let me know what you think, and in a few weeks time I'll probably produce a top 10 of the worst units. Just for a little bit of fun. If you want to look at my other lists, I've done top 10 for LA and high middle ages. So please do check out my other videos. Okay, thanks a lot for watching, and see you again soon.